You're listening to the Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole, a Rigaku podcast, hosted by Michael Brown. This is an unfiltered conversation that examines how illicit narcotic trafficking is affecting every aspect of our society, including substance addiction, treatment programs, and law enforcement. Let's unpack the issue together.
Welcome, everyone. We're here on another episode of the Opioid Matrix. Today, we have a special guest. Michael and I have Scott Silverman here. So Scott was once a substance abuser near suicide. He has turned his life around to become a crisis coach and family navigator, helping at-risk individuals also turn their lives around. Scott is the CEO and founder of Confidential Recovery, a long-term addiction treatment facility that supports continued sobriety. He is also the founder of Second Chance, a nonprofit human services agency that assists economically disadvantaged individuals and families transform their lives to become self-sufficient and contributing members of society. Scott has also authored Tell Me No, I Dare You, a guide for living a heroic life, and also the Opioid Epidemic. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Great. So Michael and I recently read the Opioid Epidemic. Fantastic read. I feel like I highly recommend it for every family in America with children, and just it was so eye-opening. And I guess we want to start with chatting about the staggering statistics you list right at the beginning of the opening of the book, and how there just seems to be no end in sight.
You know, it's interesting. The book's been out about a year, and I was working on it for about 3 years prior to. So the data, although scary, is actually in many ways significantly lower now than what it was. When I think I started, it was around, we used to call it a plane crash a day of people dying of opioid overdose. And that number was around 190, 200, and now we're north of 400 a day. And of those 400, probably close to 200 are accidental overdoses. And that's an individual that actually takes some form of medication that's laced with fentanyl, which is a poison, and overdoses and expires, dies. And that's just fascinating to me that it's moving this quickly. And, and I've been around drugs a large part of my adult life as a consumer back in the day, and also in recovery. So I hear it, see it, smell it, taste it, and experience it daily. And it is just overwhelming to me some days that this continues at this rate. And if we as a society don't find ways to put some tools in place, prevention, education, and information, we're going to be seeing a whole generation just leaving the planet.
Scott, I just read your book as well, and I echo Jen's compliments. It was an outstanding book. Like I said, she said the numbers were staggering. But having just retired from DEA after 32 years, I've seen this before. I worked in Detroit for 10 years. The African-American community was devastated by heroin first, and then by crack cocaine. I call that the first really opioid epidemic. But it really didn't get the attention that we're seeing now because opioids have spread beyond the walls of the inner city, if you will, reaching into every community, black, white, Asian, it doesn't matter. But we talk about the numbers. What motivated you to write this book? Having been a former substance user yourself, what insight did that give you into formulating your book?
I found that in order to be of service and with, to try to get to as many people and families as possible, and, and I'm just one person. I mean, I don't have a big radio show. I don't have a television show. And it's really, really hard to motivate legislative leaders, behavioral health departments, medical society, even the treatment industry. And I think part of the frustration came from me is being a treatment provider today is the average person who goes through a 28-day inpatient program. And let's assume their insurance pays for it, or they pay cash, and they're there every day in a lockdown facility, fully secure, totally structured. When they leave that facility, if they do nothing else, there's a 95% relapse rate, 95% failure rate. So part of that statistic is what got me in the treatment business. And then I started to realize that it's such a massive problem. So the idea of the book was maybe I could put together a toolkit that I could share and push out there, and I could help more families learn what they need to do to help navigate, to help their loved ones. And just last year, when the book first came out, the opioid epidemic, I sent it to every governor in the country.
Right.
And I got 5 thank you notes, and I got 1 book returned saying we don't accept gifts. And I was just like, really? Are that many people stuck on stupid that they don't want to take the time to look at a tool? And I think the outcome of the morbidity rate growth, and you mentioned, Michael, that the awareness is high, but the awareness is around the overdose, not the education and the prevention piece and excess in treatment. I mean, we talk about it, and as a guy that, you mentioned, Jen, that, Second Chance, I did that back in the 90s, working with, hard to serve people with barriers to employment, people coming out of the incarceration system, people that are returning to society with no tools. And I found in the social service arena, the same stigma, the same resistance. I mean, we spend billions on trying to help homelessness, and we're in California where half the homeless live, and the homeless population has continued to grow exponentially over the last 10 years. Now you start to throw in fentanyl, opioids, and other street drugs, and we're seeing this tsunami that doesn't seem to stop. And it won't slow down. So what are the people who are in charge actually doing to create systemic change? And I got to tell you, other than saying, we're going to do more, that's all I'm seeing. So I'm hoping the book will be a way for people to kind of swing the bat differently, maybe throw a rock through a few people's windows, and build some awareness with people who are responsible or have the empowerment to take the responsibility. Because I don't think it's one thing. I don't think it's criminal justice. I don't think it's the courts. I don't think it's treatment. I don't think it's the insurance industry. I don't think it's just families. It's going to require that concept, it's going to require a whole community to work on this and make it as important as we did, I think, with COVID. So we have that solution with real-time information, accountability, and the tools that every community needs. And, and every community basically has a similar issue, but the way they want to maybe go about it is a little different. So standardizing how we roll out the information, I think, is really critical.
Now, you mentioned COVID, which brings me to my point of Operation Warp Speed, right, under President Trump, then under President Biden. The U.S. government, mobilized immediately. Some would say it could have been a little faster, but we got on it. We created a vaccine. We worked with the FDA. We got it out there. We saved probably thousands of lives. Why not that same response for the opioid epidemic? Is it an issue of people see the drug use as an individual choice, therefore they're making that decision themselves, and it doesn't require a large warp speed approach? Or what is the bottleneck in this situation?
Well, what I've seen is, for example, when I go to talk to a company, they talk to their EAP or their HR department, that's kind of like they want to have a quiet little meeting in the back of the room and talk about it with a select group of people. And I think what happens is people who are in charge, when they raise their hand and say, we want to talk about it, there seems to be this admission that there's a problem there, even though there's a problem there that they know exists. So taking the responsibility and saying, hey, we not only need to not talk about it, stop talking about it, we need to get action items in place. We need to get information into the schools. We've got to start motivating, the people, the change agents, the influencers that can really send this messaging out in a way and tell the stories. I mean, there isn't, I think, a week that goes by now that we don't see some high roller, a movie star, a musician, someone who's famous, either expire themselves or someone in their family. And, to your point, Michael, about, the drugs, opioids are not zip code specific. And fentanyl is so inexpensive. You don't even have to have money to get fentanyl, because the manufacturers and the distributors will front you the drugs because there's so much profit in it. They'll give it to you and say, look, Johnny, go out and sell the product, bring the money back. You owe me X for this much product. and you can, whatever else you can get, you get to keep. And then now you become a paying customer. So, and the manufacturers, they don't care. I mean, they care, but they don't care that people are dying. And, their quality assurance is not like a pharmacy. They're not FDA approved, and they're not being supervised by anybody. They're just making this product, which is poison, and they're pushing it out there. And, now we're starting to see marijuana causing a lot of overdoses and deaths as well. So societally, it baffles me that we're just not using enough common sense to realize what's going on, to find ways to slow it down and improve the way we inspire our young people to make informed decisions. Right now, 18 to 45-year-olds in our country, the number one killer is opioids. How is that possible? After the tobacco education piece, supposedly, and what we've learned, and to your point, Michael, that the federal government created a mechanism with COVID, and we're losing more people now with opioids than we are with COVID. So we know that we have a mechanism in place that works. So to your question, I don't know the easy answer. I don't even know a hard answer to that. I don't even know what to say. I can't get my mayor to talk to me, the governor to talk to me, and maybe it's just me, old white Jewish guy. They don't want to talk to me. Don't know what it is, but my phone should be ringing off the hook. And I did an interview a couple of weeks ago on a local station. I got in trouble because I called out the mayor and I said, I dare you to call me. Nobody. Nope. It's like they're not talking about it. And, they're talking to the medical society, and they're putting, navigators in place at hospitals, but there aren't enough treatment beds. And I'm just using our community as an example, but I'm sure it exists across the country. And, other parts of the world that are having success with decreasing overdosing and increasing access to treatment, what they're doing is they're giving people options. And I think a lot of us don't think we have an option. And if it's an accidental overdose, and it's just you're taking something unbeknownst to you, that's just a mistake, and not using common sense and choosing carefully about what you're putting in your body.
Now, you mentioned influencers. I think this is a really important aspect. Seems to be a counter-revolutionary movement in this country. We talk about rap music, trap music, very aggressive gangster rap music, which openly advocates drug trafficking, drug use, prostitution, and violence. And car companies, watchmakers, alcohol companies, sports clothing, they're making billions of dollars when rappers wear this material and they do their videos. And if you go into the African-American community, any kid can sing any of these songs, and they all aspire to be gangsters. Aren't we pushing against a multi-billion-dollar industry that says we want drug trafficking, we want to make money off of it? If rap music went away today, wouldn't that affect the bottom line of many international companies who are profiting from drug addiction?
I think that's an accurate observation. I also believe that, movies and music stimulate this kind of activity, if you will, or these kind of portals that kids want to get involved with. But the other side of it is it goes to show that they can influence, and they can create change, and they can garner support, which means that we know there are tools. So how do we reverse this? How do we take that kind of energy, that product, that information highway, and use it in a positive way so we can help save lives? Because I don't think I've ever met anybody who seems happy with the fact that kids are overdosing at the rate they currently are, and that for some reason we're just not doing enough. And I think everyone agrees with that. Even the influencers say that. But at the end of the day, again, we just saw what we did as a country, and I don't want to speak for the federal government, with COVID. I mean, and one of the biggest complaints I just heard recently at a conference I was at is the data that comes out right now around the opioid epidemic is about 12 to 18 months behind. So, and with COVID, there was a way they measured the morbidity rate each day. Every major metropolitan area reported it up. They had the numbers. They knew how many people were expiring, how full the hospitals were, where the empty beds were. They knew all of that. So we know that there is a platform out there that if we were able to shift it over. How do we make it important to the people that control those buttons, that push those buttons? I'm not sure. I mean, I like to think that I'm doing, but it seems like I'm failing because, one person can help another person, but with the information I have, I'm willing to spend, 18 hours a day talking to people if that's what it takes. But I think we need to have it at a much larger scale. And, I talked with you briefly and you, Jen, about what you guys are doing. And not that this should be, 4 hours of media every day, but you know what? While we're in this major, call it a forest fire, and we're taking a squirt gun to a forest fire, we're never going to put it out. We're never going to slow it down. We're never going to control it unless we take some real hard steps to implement tools locally, regionally, statewide, and federally.
Now it brings me back to marijuana, decriminalization of recreational use marijuana, decriminalization of medical use marijuana. We all know that the THC, the relevant psychotropic substance in marijuana now, is you can get it at over 100%. This is not, as I would say, my father's marijuana at 6%. So we're putting a substance out there that's 100 times more potent than it was 20 years ago, and we're expecting people to use it responsibly. With decriminalization of marijuana, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and even some people are talking about decriminalizing small amounts of fentanyl. Are we working against ourselves by saying we're normalizing drug use, but at the same time, we want people to be responsible? Can you, as a former substance user, can you be responsible in using narcotics up to a point?
So far, Michael, every question you've asked me is, no matter what I respond, I'm going to get in trouble. And I like that about you. I think that, as a person who is in long-term recovery, I'm a person who doesn't matter what I touch. One is not enough and 1,000's too many, or 1,000's too many and one's not enough. So I don't get involved with anything mood altering, and if I have a procedure or something I need done, I'll do anything I can to avoid taking any kind of potentially addictive medication. But to your point about marijuana, and I've been listening to this for, 30 years, marijuana comes from God's green earth. So people think of it, as an herb. But you're right, the THC content in it is significantly higher than it has ever been. And now, because it's a very popular, I think that decriminalization, if it takes place, and I'm not necessarily against it, but if we're going to do something like that on a federal level, we should make sure that every community has enough access to treatment for anybody who chooses it. So at least that way, I think that's the model in Portugal. It is what they do, and they've, I think, legalized everything. And the idea, though, is if you want to get into treatment, if your family's done an intervention, if you're handcuffed to a gurney, or you're sitting in an emergency department, and you have a feeling, you just nearly lost your life, but before you leave here today, you're going to get a referral where you can get into treatment tonight or tomorrow and address some of the issues that are going on. Because there are a lot of people who are abusing drugs who may not necessarily be addicted to them, but at the end of the day, because they're poison, they're not getting a chance. I mean, when people say, your treatment facilities, some of them are, a third empty right now. Well, why is that? Well, people aren't making it to treatment now. They're not even making it to the emergency department. They're going right from where they get picked up by the medical examiner and going to an autopsy. And again, I don't think we've seen 10% of this problem yet. It's unfolding at a rate we've never seen before. And it's going to be worse than COVID in the next couple of years if we don't find a way. And, so back to your question, decriminalization, I don't know. We talk about injection sites. We talk about needle exchanges. We talk about harm reduction. We talk about medically assisted treatment. I mean, those are all tools, but the politics, that are involved, and I'm hearing it now at ground level with all the settlement money that's coming out from the lawsuits, and the people that are on the advocacy side, the treatment advocacy side, education side, are scared to death that the money's going to go to build more municipality infrastructure. I mean, one of the groups of South Dakota, I think, got a $325 million settlement. Don't quote me on the state. And they used it to build another hospital. And there won't be operating money afterwards to support the clinical team. I mean, right now in San Diego, it was just shared by our head of the county supervisors that we need 18,000 clinical providers, and it's going to take 5 years to find them. 5 years either to train them, find them, or get other people to take a look at doing that. So if we're 5 years behind in San Diego, imagine what it's like in other areas. And I've talked to families who are trying to get in to see a psychiatrist because their children are just out of control. Kind of a general term, and they tell me it's taken a year to get in to see a psychiatrist. So if there's not the therapeutic clinical support, and we're going to decriminalize something that's that high of content of THC, and the fentanyl is moving into, being laced with almost everything that people are consuming now from illicit drugs. This is I thought we had a perfect storm before. Now it's even more, in my opinion, more scary than it's ever been, because the people that have the job description to do something about it now not only are overwhelmed, and they think underfunded and understaffed. So we're in for some real interesting times, fasten your seatbelt, as they say. I don't know if I've answered your question or not about that.
No, it's definitely where I was getting at with decriminalization. But if I look at decriminalization from the point of the Sinaloa cartel, I make my money by selling millions of corner bags of 1 to 2 grams of whatever narcotic on the street. So if I hear the United States, such as Oregon, decriminalizing personal use amounts, I'm going to flood Oregon with more narcotics because I know my dealers can avoid getting caught, and I know those who use drugs won't be prosecuted. So Sinaloa loves decriminalization. CJ&G loves decriminalization, and the programs in Oregon, based on the statistics, are failing. They're still seeing overdoses. They're seeing increase in drug usage, and the police are just standing around with their arms folded because there's nothing they can do. So at the same time, we have harm reduction saying we want to make it easier to use drugs, safer to use drugs, which I don't think drug use can be made safe, can be made less dangerous. Then at the other hand, we're saying, hey, it's okay to use drugs. So aren't we pushing waves of people into addiction, willful blindness, if you will, on the part of the overall societal movement to come up with an easy fix to a very complex problem?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Yes, we are. I absolutely agree with you. And it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You're trying to find ways to make people happy. I mean, Colorado's experienced the same thing. They were one of the first states to legalize marijuana. They had people jumping off of roofs, people coming into to Denver and buying marijuana and going, oh my God, it's so strong. I want more of it. And the thing that's interesting in Oregon is the people that are on the front lines, what they're saying is the sales of illicit marijuana haven't slowed down at all. Even though you have a choice. You can go buy it legally here, or you can get it over here illegally. And realistically, the illegal marijuana, if you will, is about 40% less money. And the cartels, they don't even have to flood the market, Michael. All they have to do is just say, we're open for business.
Right.
Send us your credit card. Give us your crypto. Give us a point where we can distribute it to you. And you know what? You're such a great customer of ours. We're going to go ahead and front you a couple of tons to get you going. Let us know when you need more. I mean, that's the way this is going now. And I heard just as of 6 months ago that methamphetamine, the super labs are in Mexico, San Diego, big port for that, or portal, not a port, but a portal, that they were fronting methamphetamine to distributors in Skid Row in LA, which is where 70,000 homeless people live. And they were fronting methamphetamine. So a couple of different, on the ground advocates, distributors, ice cream people, whatever you want to call them, could sell the product, lean the money, and then on the second round, they could buy it and pay back the methamphetamine that was fronted to them. So, and now they've got gangs that are segregated. And now the homeless are scared because because gangs come with, protection and weapons, and they're organized, even though it's for the wrong reasons. But it's a perfect storm. They've got an audience there that, does not want to be living on the streets, but, if they can anesthetize themselves with other drugs, they're going to continue to do it. And in California, the trickle down it's not just people who have money that are consuming it. People who don't have money have access to it now, and what you can get on the dark web and what you can get on the streets, it is incredible. So to your point earlier, criminal justice will never keep up with this. So just recently, a guy that sold or gave, I don't know what they 5 or 6 pills to some people. 2 of them, I think 3 of them overdosed. 1 of them died, and he's going to serve 10 years for murder, which is awesome. I mean, it took the DA, I think, 4 years to set this all up to make it happen. But think about that one person that they caught and how many others are out there that sitting with pockets full of dope that they can sell to anybody they want to. And to your point, law enforcement, especially with the California AB 109, if you don't have a certain quantity on you, they just dump it out and walk on, or you didn't even approach because they know they can't get a conviction. And if they arrest you and they put you in jail and you're released, and a couple people, that group in Los Angeles, San Francisco, there were 3 of them involved with that large fentanyl bust. They were released from jail within 2 business days, and we still haven't heard why. How did that happen? And they were caught.
I bring this to the question of minimum mandatories and equity in law enforcement. Now, when I was in Detroit working crack cocaine, 5 grams got you 5 years first offense. Over 650 got you life first offense. And it was extremely successful, in my opinion, in reducing the amount that was distributed on the street, because dealers didn't want to go to jail for 5 years. So we saw the crack distribution disseminate. But on the flip side, it arrested a lot of African Americans, which people said was injustice, and therefore we have the no bail, and we see the decreased arrests in the African American community. We see no law enforcement really going after organized crime groups, Crips, Bloods, Black Gangster Disciples. Isn't that really the heart of the problem? Is the distribution networks are not being targeted? Does race play an issue in who gets arrested now and who doesn't get arrested?
I would say, Michael, that the vulnerable populations, and I say vulnerable because what I mean is if somebody doesn't have a job, or they're out of work, or they feel like they shouldn't work, or they don't, they're not getting paid enough, whatever the reason. And I think through COVID, when this federal stimulus money came out, a lot of people stopped working. And I think what's happened is, we lost 30% of our workforce in San Diego. And right now, there's job openings across the country. They're saying 15 to 20%, of employers can't, 100% of employers can't get 20% of their workforce replaced right now because there isn't the motivation of labor to walk in to want to work. And, to your point about the gangs, they've got a big part of it. But right now, in my opinion, the dark web, being able to order online, being able to get Uber delivered. You saw those 3 in New York that overdosed on cocaine and died. And these were sophisticated, smart people. Same supplier. I don't think the supplier got in trouble because I don't know how they would have traced it back unless somebody left a phone number and an address. So we're seeing people make these decisions. So I think it's going to have to be more the reverse side, where we're looking at empowering maybe individuals or communities or race, if you will, where they're vulnerable targets. But on the other hand, think about this. There's no disincentive for people to stop doing it. I mean, even though this one guy got arrested, he wasn't even technically a dealer. He was just a guy getting some party drugs for his friends. So, and he wasn't associated with any cartel. So to your point, if we could find out who sold him and who sold to them, and that's what criminal justice does. That's not what I do. So at the end of the day, I think we're just seeing an opportunity for people to make fast money and get a hold of things easily. And, when I say dark web, you can go on the dark web, you can use crypto, you can have products, mixes, capsules, pill making machines, scales, all delivered to your home through USPS. So it's not hard to do. And that's the kind of information that's out there on social media. So, I'm not sure. I mean, the cartels, I think, manufacture it, but I think there's such a demand here in this country. They can give it to smaller groups of people who can distribute for them now. So they're almost like behind this screen, like the Wizard of Oz, and they're making a fortune off the backs of others and the morbidity of our communities.
You mentioned the dark web. It's kind of the Amazon for drug dealers at this point. And I know you touched on this a little bit in your book, but recreational hallucinogenics, right? You have doctors like a PhD, Ralph Hahn, in 2003, University of Berlin, created the 251N bomb. And he did it in a very innocent manner to map out serotonin receptors in the brain. But, the other PhDs who were not as ethical as he was took it and turned it into a recreational drug, which surged through the community, addicted a lot of people, and they eventually banned it. But then they just simply changed the molecules and created another substance. So I see this new PhD Frankenstein laboratory in the U.S. as almost a greater threat than the cartels, because they have the knowledge of chemistry, molecular science, molecular biology, and just can continue to create new legal recreational drugs. And of course, it takes DEA 18 months to ban a substance. So we're competing against cartels, and now we're competing against PhDs, right, who are flooding the streets with internet accessibility. How do we deal with that? What is the answer to the internet security question?
It's like that show, you remember Breaking Bad? That's what's going on today. And I can't even imagine cartels, like most business industries, they have an association or a union. I mean, I'm sure you did it in your field of profession, where you go to these conferences and learn best practices. They just don't have to do that. There's no need to fight over market share, because there's such a demand for the product itself. So at the end of the day, what's happening is it's almost like jump in, there's plenty of room, there's plenty of money, there's plenty of consumers. And because law enforcement can't work quick enough, fast enough, and as you said, I heard about a new product, I can't remember the name of it now, that's now being manufactured. And it came from some over-the-counter stuff, and it's highly deadly as well. So your point about other people have a little bit of smarts, they're making new cocktails, we used to call them in my day, where they put different things together that give you, more of a stimulus high or more of a down high, or help you sleep better, or help you just kind of escape, and there's the short-term medication, longer-term medication. I mean, I used to take hallucinogens, and, they'd last 10, 12 hours. Methamphetamine was a much shorter time frame. And then marijuana was to help you go to sleep. But as you said, back in the day, marijuana was like, smoking rope. It didn't, the THC content was about 7%. If you could, find a good friend who was growing it, the right way. And of course I did. And I knew where it was coming from. But today you can get it over the counter. It's high level THC, not like the street. So I think we're going to see more of this, because as one drug finds its way into a community, some smart person is going to go, why don't we try this? That way we don't have to wait for a week for distribution. We can put our own, our own autograph on something that we're making ourselves, kind of like, branding our own stuff.
Now there's a lot of conversation like we're having on harm reduction on the end user, but what about the larger picture when we look at drug production, which takes us to precursor chemicals? When I worked in Miramar, I was able to buy a Rigaku hand scanner, give it to the police, and they started interdicting precursors coming from China that were mislabeled. In 1 month of using those scanners, they seized roughly 6 tons of precursors that were mislabeled, which was revolutionary. So here we have an opportunity where technology can benefit law enforcement. So that brings into the picture China. China is not only allowing, tons of non-regulated precursors for fentanyl, amphetamines, and other substances to go to Mexico. In Mexico, they're then produced into narcotics. Are we not addressing the elephant in the room, the political State Department issue that no one wants to talk about? China is not cooperating. Mexico is not cooperating. Do we need to take a tougher stance on these countries to bend them or to get their cooperation in this instance? Because until we address the production issue, there's no way you're going to limit the increase in amounts that are coming in which will increase the users, which make your job so much harder, if not impossible.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, next question.
So, it's interesting. When I got invited to this, it was actually a one-day conference for DEA, DOJ, and the U.S. Attorney and DAs and criminal justice in San Diego a couple years ago. And they had flown this supervising DEA agent in from China. And he was talking about real-time stuff that was happening there. And he talked about the different provinces and how they make it here and ship it there, then they box it here, then ship it over there. And by the time they got to the third province, it was no longer illegal contraband because it was coming from a province that hadn't manufactured. They had some sort of a weird workaround. And to your point about enforcing, I think enforcement causes the motivated manufacturer to be more clandestine. And since they have so much money, they could pay off. And I'm making these assumptions now, but I watch Narcos, so I get it. And, I think that they're making so much money, they're able to power broker whatever needs to happen. When I heard the story in a pharmacy in Virginia where they sold 3 million pills a year, and it was a pharmacy about 800 square feet or something in a town of 4,000 people. And, this was exposed on 60 Minutes that the DEA had known about this pharmacy for about 7 or 8 years. And they had pressure put on them by the DOJ to not intervene because it was a pharmacy and it was a FDA approved pill, Oxycontin. And as long as there was a formal prescription written by a medical professional, the pharmacy's fiduciary responsibility was to fill the script. So if that's our enemy, if you will, or our competition, I'm not sure how we combat that. I really don't know how we combat that other than saying to the consumer, look, one pill can kill. You certainly have a choice, but understand, the DEA just came out the other day, 60% nationally of the illicit drugs that are on the streets that people are buying, 60% is laced with fentanyl. We had a DA here in California say it in February that it was up north of 80%. And I was on this big webinar with, 150 people. And I said that. I quoted the article that I'd read. And I got filleted by some bean counters at the county saying that study hasn't been done yet. I said, the information just came from the DA, and the DA got the information from the medical examiner, and the medical examiner got it from the autopsies that they did by doing blood work while they did the autopsy. And I said, why you would even argue and question the data because you haven't seen a study and then take that kind of conversation back to your colleagues? It's just counterintuitive to me. So those are the kind of things that, we're up against. I get asked that question probably once every 2 weeks. If you were in control, what would you do?
What was the answer be to that?
Well, I'm not going to give you that, Michael. We're going to do that.
You have to give me that?
We'll do that in the next show. We'll do
the next book.
Once I know where you live, I don't think there's an easy answer. But if I love this question. If you had a magic wand, I talk to clients. If you had a magic wand, what would you want to do with it? So if I had a magic wand, I would, I'd like to talk to the White House. I hear that the drug czar, they're in this little cubicle and they have this funding and it's basically earmarked for the traditional modalities that they've been giving this money to. Let me jump over. There was a guy I know, he's a homeless provider in San Diego. He and I went to the same high school. He said in the paper the other day, quote, I've been doing this for 37 years. I've never seen it this bad. Okay. Expert homeless provider. My sense is if you've been doing something for 37 years and it's gotten worse, you need to tender your resignation and let who's ever next in charge take over. Because there's no way with your leadership, if you're making statements like that publicly, you have any idea how to fix the problem. You can warehouse, you can rent shelters, you could feed. It was a homeless issue. And I know this guy and they don't even test people that come in and make it easy for them to get the treatment because that's not really their job description. kind of like now law enforcement has had to become social workers in our community because they're part of the PERT education, psychiatric emergency response team, because most of the domestic violence calls that people go on, you've got a major mental health issue and potentially a drug issue or alcohol issue going on in that environment. So if that's the majority of the calls, and in our community, we just quadrupled the social work and clinical partnering with law enforcement, but they're really only running the shift a day because they can't get enough people or funding to run it 24/7. And, and if you want to go to detox, if law enforcement doesn't drop you off, you have to wait till they open. We had because I think homelessness and behavioral health are tied together. And, even if we could fit major issues with substance use disorders, we're going to have to deal with that because there's a large percentage of that population that's not working, that doesn't have access to health care, that's not even willing to get help until they're dragged in by an ambulance. And that's, we used to kind of joke about the best insurance you could have in San Diego. It's just 911. Call 911 because then they have to serve you in the hospital. So we're doing a lot of things, in my opinion, that with little changes, we could make some big differences. So that's kind of like my magic wand. But if I'm going to be one of the, look, I just got this call from a guy who says to me, you know what, we really need your help at the county. I want to get you on a task force. And I'm like, no. Why not? I said, I've been on task force for over 15 years. I don't need to go to another meeting. Everybody at that meeting knows exactly what they need to do. And I said, I don't want to sit in a room full of people who have, that definition of insanity, do what you've always done, get what you've always gotten. I think we need to terminate some of these people or hold them accountable and stop giving them money if they can't show that they're making improvements, even at a micro scale. Because that's where the money's going, to do the same thing we've always done. And clearly, if the problems continue to grow, we're not making any improvement, we're not making changes, and more importantly, we're not saving lives.
No, as a DEA agent of 32 years, I've progressively seen that. And for 32 years, we arrested more, we seized more, and we seem to be running in place, just keeping the tsunami from becoming too high, but just kind of managing it at a steady pace, but we're not decreasing.
Michael, when did you retire from the DEA?
I retired in May of 2021.
Okay. So roughly a year ago, a little over a year ago. And I would sense that the statement you just made, that it's gotten 25% worse in this last year, just the last year, as far as the frequency, the volume coming across borders, and the consumption level, just the last year. We'll see the data at the end of this year, but I'd be willing to bet that we're going to see that 400 number. It's going to go up to like 500 a day. And by the way, when I use that number with opioids, that doesn't count methamphetamine, marijuana, alcohol, or suicide. And that takes us well north of 1,000 people every day. It's 30,000 a month. That's almost 400,000 a year. And each one of those people that die have family members. So they say, what is it? Someone said, I quote it, one in five young people's biggest issue right now is some form of mood-altering substance, not prescribed. 1 in 5.
Yeah, I just read an article that was, it said 25 million young adults between 15 and 18 are on some sort of prescription pharmaceutical for attention deficit, overactivity, etc. So we're creating a generation of kids who are used to taking some kind of substance.
Right.
So it's just a natural progression.
Phil, it's just and I don't know if you heard, but Adderall right now, evidently there's a shortage.
Right.
And they're also going to change, I think, the schedule of that drug, which is going to make it harder to get. So imagine the younger people that are dependent on Adderall that are going to have to go out in their mind's eye and replace it with something. That's exactly what happened with OxyContin. When all of a sudden they stopped writing the scripts because the AMA and the DEA, DOJ, Pharmaceutical Association, Behavioral Health, CDC all said, hey, we got to stop writing scripts for Oxycontin. And the people that were dependent on it were in the millions. And I think that's also contributed to a large consumption, especially during COVID, of people getting a hold of illicit opioids, heroin, fentanyl, and street, got an Oxycontin on the street now. It used to be $80. Pill, I don't know what it is now, if you can even find it. But you don't have to. Someone will say, hey, try this. It's got a little fentanyl in it. It's almost like Oxycontin.
Jay, did you want to ask a question?
Well, I wanted to bring that young generation up. You had given that stat earlier in the conversation about 18 to 24-year-olds, and what I keep hearing is kids are starting on prescription medicine younger and younger, and so yes, we do have a population that's just so easily taking pills. Pills they're not afraid of them. It's not a big deal. I take a pill in the morning. My mom knows I take a pill. And so when they start swapping and exchanging, and it just feels like it's just a part of life, and it's no different. It's not a big deal. So I wanted to hear a little bit about your opinion about that and what you've seen in regards to this population we're bringing up, where it just feels like everyone's prescribed something, and so it just becomes very easily we're all on medication.
Yeah, it's like I don't sleep well. Oh, the doctor can prescribe something. If I want an antibiotic, I have got to go see my doc. I mean, I can do it virtually now, but it's amazing. And if I wanted, probably Xanax, that would be easier to get. So to the point that we're a society that wants to feel better quicker. And, a recent study that I got to stop reading, but 97% of this country has a mental health issue or some form of mental health issue. 97%. And my reaction to that was because of how I like to look at things is I want to meet the 3%. Who are those people? Who did, and how did they, what criteria did they use to determine if you don't have a problem? But if that's true, and so people want a pill to go to sleep, wake up, concentrate, to study, to relax, to remove themselves, to numb themselves. And look, when I talk to families at a different level of siblings, because I work with some families, I've been around long enough now, I'm dealing with, the eldest son, maybe even a grandson or granddaughter. And the kids go, you know what? Everybody in my family drank like there was no tomorrow. And all I'm doing is smoking marijuana. And everybody says marijuana is better for you than alcohol. So the mindset that is, growing organically has kind of planted those seeds. And since we're kind of a pill-oriented society, or not really a pill-oriented, but because I hate to say that, but I think it's true that I'm going to feel better faster society. I want to fix it. I don't want to take time to meditate. I don't want to practice self-care. I don't want to journal. I mean, I personally don't want to exercise. I know I'd rather have a donut than I would kale. I say it like that because I don't like kale, but I think that if we don't give people informed information where they can make informed decisions, they're going to probably make one that's not going to be good for them. And I think, when you look at what's going on in society, I mean, look at I'll go political for a second here. Look at the way our federal leadership runs their day-to-day communication amongst themselves. I mean, when I'm talking to people, I'm 68, and they're like, "Hey, Scott, what have your people done?" And I'm like, "My people." The watching, from the president down, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, the way that they treat each other and talk to each other. It's like, I don't know how we're going to have them participate in solving the problem until that forest fire is, on the front lawn. And I think it's pretty darn close because there are legislative leaders across this country and mayors of cities and governors who have lost family members to this. And you'd think you'd see them on the news every day. You don't. They're not. And then if you are, they're talking about the environment, energy, carbon footprint, those are all important issues. But smog isn't killing 400 people a day. I mean, Kale is like 400 people a day. So who's going to be the spokesperson? And Marty's last name, the Secretary of Labor.
Marty Walsh.
He was the mayor of Boston. Marty Walsh.
Marty
Walsh.
Yes.
Marty's public. He's in recovery, but he's working on labor. But so there are people in high level places. I mean, Patrick Kennedy. I just spoke to him a couple of months ago, and so I'm trying to knock on the doors. I mean, I wish, Michael, maybe when we get done with this, I wish you'd call Joe Biden and say, Joe, I want you to call my buddy Scott and talk to him about this, opioid epidemic. That's what I want to see happen if I want to create change, and I get the ear of somebody who can really help. But, I work with veterans, and we work with the VA, and we were just told last week, our new Veterans Navigation Center that we're opening, which is kind of like a coordinating hub. It's what I used to do in the nonprofit world. So I started a new nonprofit, which has just pissed my wife off, because you know what it takes to run a nonprofit. A lot of work. And we were told that our model doesn't exist in the country by somebody who really knows. And they said, how quickly could you ramp up? I said, we're a pilot. We just launched in November. And I'm going to need a year or two to get my infrastructure together, even though I've done a lot of this in different framework. But that's where I want to put my energy, because our local VA is really working hard with us. But they have a $260 billion budget. And there's no coordinating center like this outside or even inside the VA. And they work in silos in a lot of different ways in different communities. I mean, if you have a medical emergency, it's different. But when it comes to behavioral health, and they're concerned now because a lot of veterans, were on opioids, prescribed opioids for pain. That was an easy treatment for doctors when someone says, my back hurts, I was wounded, and God forbid, make them comfortable. And now they're talking about maybe using marijuana as a pain replacement. And the science says it doesn't work.
Yeah, there's a new bill out now, I think, being talked about that's going to trying to legalize medical use marijuana for vets, but then you have the whole federal system. It's still Schedule 1 substance. But since we're running out of time, I want to give you a quick opportunity to talk a little bit more about your book. What were some of the key issues in your book that you're really proud of that you put out there, research or some of your findings, and how can people get a copy of it?
The primary piece of the book that I'm probably most excited about is it's like a toolbox. My first book was kind of a symphony of my life and what happened with the people that I served. And what I did in the second book is I wanted to make sure that there's information in there that anybody who picks up a book, no matter where you are in the hierarchy of the family that's suffering with some form of exposure to somebody who's self-medicating, and I'm going to keep those terms simple so I don't label anybody, or behaviorally that's being induced with some sort of a chemical, you can find some footprints and some direction and even some contact information. And then the second part that I'm most proud of, and there are stories from families. And there's a woman in the book, Laura Stack, who lost a son to marijuana. And she talks about, the dabbing that goes on with marijuana. She's quoted in the book. And, there's all these different families scattered around the country who have taken their pain and loss and tried to turn it into something positive to help others. But, and I'm involved with Rotary now on a national level, a Rotary Action Group whose main mission is to end the opioid crisis. And I thought it was such a grandiose plan. I wanted to join it because it fit my fiber, because Rotary helped eradicate polio internationally. So they've got this dream, and they have a infrastructure and they have a footprint in the world where, if they can get the kind of tools that they need, a lot of it's just people connectivity, there'll be opportunities there. So, and someone there read my book and they picked up on it. So to be able to open people's eyes, to be able to say, it's not an autobiography, it's something to help save lives. And clearly in the book, it talks about how to do that. So it's a kind of a DIY book on helping a loved one avoid going to their funeral. So I'm hoping people can grab it. They can get it on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way. You can go to my website, yourcrisiscoach.com. I can mail it to you. You can pay for it there. And just, if nothing else, spread the word. And you know what? If you're sitting there and you go, I don't have any money, but I want to read it, for God's sakes, if you whine loud enough, I'll send you a PDF. So you can have it, you know. Do you have?
Roger that.
Yeah, so let me know. If you talk to people, and you can always reach me at 619-993-2738. 619, area code 993-2738. And it doesn't matter what time of day. I put my phone up when I go to bed. You know, but at my age, I'm up every couple hours. But call me, text me, leave a message, email me, and I'll do everything I can, if I can, to help. I will be able to, if I can't personally help you, I promise you I can help point you in a direction, give you some coaching, help you navigate. And that, you know, between now and the end of the year, that will be my pleasure to give that to you free, which is unfortunately, my second favorite F word. So if you reach out and you let me know, I'll do whatever I can to be a resource. And, you know, if you don't know what else to do in your community, reach out to your governor. Go, hey, what happened to that book Scott sent you last year? You know, talk to your legislative leaders, you know, knock on doors. And if you're one of those influencers, call me. Let's get this going, because it's not going to get better on its own. There's no vaccine for it. And there is hope and help.
Right. Yeah. So what I thought was great about your book is it's easily digestible. So it's an easy read, and you have key takeaways at the end of each section. You have lots of examples, which makes it interesting and relatable. So I highly recommend it. And I really loved and enjoyed reading it. So.
Well, Scott, we want to thank you for coming on. This has been extremely educational, and hopefully our listeners will get a copy of the Opioid Epidemic and you know, get a better understanding of what we're dealing with, because at some point we're going to reach a point of no return, whereas no matter what we do, we're all going to go down. And I think we're getting very close to that. So again, thank you for coming on. Definitely want to talk to you again and monitor this situation, because I think your insight is extremely valuable. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Rigaku Analytical Devices is a U.S.-based manufacturer of advanced analytical equipment for the identification of unknown substances. Utilizing Raman in our devices means we can non-destructively scan through packaging with a result of identification in less than 1 minute. Rigaku is committed to supporting and partnering with your agency to tackle this problem together. To learn more, visit rigakuanalytical.com. Thank you for joining host Michael Brown for this episode of the Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole, a Rigaku podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. No matter the controversy around the illegal drug supply chain, our mission is to save lives. Thanks for listening. Until next time.